me.
Welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast.
The podcast for rehab clinicians that want to better serve older adults.
And now, your host, Dustin Jones.
All right, Kenny Venere, Mr. Physiological PT. Welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast. Thank you for your time this evening.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I'll try not to bore your listeners too much, and just getting over a cold, so I might be sniffling like Donald Trump a little bit.
You're good. We talked about before, if it gets bad, I can always auto-tune your voice.
Yeah, so I'm looking for a career in pop music, so you can be my springboard.
I can tell. Well, I'm excited to talk to you. We've interacted a decent amount online. I've really enjoyed how you write and what you talk about and your perspective. And you're a very thoughtful guy and willing to question things and not just go along with the crowds, if you will. So I'm excited for the listeners to meet you too. But let's just start kind of with the summary of your career up to this point. What does your rehab career look like? Okay,
so it'll be pretty quick. I graduated from Northeastern University in 2014, so still pretty green.
Nice.
It was nice being over there in Boston because you throw a rock and hit some of the best hospitals around. So very fortunate to have gotten some experience out there. I worked for a little bit in the Massachusetts area before moving out to Salt Lake City in May of 2015. And that's kind of when I got started in home health. So that's been a nice transition, completely new environment for me, something I didn't have a lot of exposure to through school. And as you know, being a new grad in home health presents its own fun and unique challenges. So it's been a great transition.
Salt Lake, my sister's in Park City.
Oh, and
great. I'm trying. She's a PT as well, actually. And I'm trying to convince her to do home health. So I may need to get your help.
Hey, absolutely. Where is she right now in Park City?
I've only been there a couple times. She's like right off the main drag. She's about a 15-minute walk.
Okay.
I'll call it downtown, but
yeah, probably like the main street there. You call it Main Street actually. So
yeah. So let's go back to school. When you were in PT school, what was your bent? Like what were you really interested in going through those 3 years?
I kind of jumped around a little bit. I was lucky that I did a direct entry program at Northeastern. So out of high school, I was kind of within the PT program. It's a 6-year program where you essentially are in school year round. So no summer breaks, that kind of thing. And they also have your more traditional kind of post-baccalaureate DPT program that mixes in with the direct entry after the 3rd or 4th year there. I actually got accepted to Northeastern for international business. And I think in August, before starting in September of my freshman year, just made an impulse decision to switch to physical therapy. Could have been a horrible mistake, but fortunately it worked out and I'm still here. But when I was going through school, I wasn't really interested in the thing that's most popular, I'd say, as a PT student, the outpatient orthopedic sports medicine. I was very interested in the higher acuity of inpatient acute care, inpatient rehab, and pediatrics in the acute care world. So somehow I ended up in home health geriatrics, but
it's a windy road to home health for many.
That's where I'll go next.
So what was it about the acuity? Like why were you drawn to that? Because sports is sexy, man. You get to work with athletes and it's a lot more fun, more prestigious in a lot of ways.
Yeah, a little less glory in the hospital and that. That's for sure. I don't think I'll be on ESPN anytime soon talking about how to help people perform a sit to stand.
I'd watch it for sure, but
I don't know. I had some sick folks in the family growing up that had some very fortunate experiences in some hospitals in the Massachusetts area. So I think that influenced me a little bit. Northeastern University is a little different in the sense that in addition to your standard clinical rotations, their big thing is the co-op program, which is you do within the physical therapy program and other majors. But in PT, you do 2 6-month co-ops where you work full time, 40 hours, and no classes or anything like that.
Wow.
In the role of kind of like a physical therapy tech or aide. And my first one was at Spaulding Rehab Hospital on the spinal cord injury unit. And that was my first real exposure to what physical therapy can be outside of what I think most people think of physical therapy, the outpatient orthopedics and that kind of thing. So that just really drew me in. Maybe I'm a little bit of a physical therapy hipster and wanted to go against the grain in my skinny jeans or something like that.
Yeah.
But
you and Kyle Ridgway.
What's that? Yeah.
You and Kyle Ridgway both.
Absolutely. So that kind of really drew me in, just seeing these folks who were at the lowest of the low after having a life-changing event like a spinal cord injury and losing their role in society, their role in their family, their role in their career, losing physical function to such a drastic extent, whether it's a C4, Asia A complete lesion or a lower incomplete lesion, that kind of thing. And just seeing the progress they could make over a handful of months from not really being able to sit themselves up in bed to popping wheelies over curbs and that kind of stuff was pretty remarkable and inspiring.
Yeah. So what was your first job after school?
So I did a little bit of outpatient orthopedics, and I was doing a little bit of per diem work with another place that I did a co-op at, Shriners Hospital for Children. I think it's a network of 22 hospitals in America, one in Canada.
We've got one here.
Yeah, they're all over. In Boston, it's primarily pediatric burns. So that was a very unique setting that I got a lot of great experience with, working with kids from all over the world and some truly premier clinicians, surgeons, nurses, and things like that in the field of pediatric burn care. So I kind of mixed between that for a little bit and then jetted off to Salt Lake City.
Yeah. So outpatient orthopedics. What, with considering your awesome opportunity at Spaulding Rehab.
Yeah.
What were some of the most practical lessons learned or wisdom that you gained at Spaulding that was most beneficial for you in that outpatient orthopedic position, if you had to think of that off the top of your head?
So I think just the idea that everybody's trying to get back to something unique, whether it's someone after a spinal cord injury who wants to be able to hold their grandchild again, or a high school athlete who is working hard in their junior, senior season to maybe take that next step to college athletics, and understanding that everyone might have similar presentations from a clinical signs and symptoms standpoint, but their complex embodied experience, to sound a little smart and philosophical there, is going to be completely unique and really change what that hamstring strain means, or what that spinal cord injury means, or what that low back pain means. So
that's a good point. And I appreciate that perspective, because if I think personally, I kind of started off in the sports realm and did not see a lot of value in geriatric rehab, which, is mainly what I'm doing now in the sense of like, what are we really doing? Does this really make a difference? And now it's like, I've completely switched to where I value tremendously what I'm doing. And I'm sure there's lots of biases in that, and not valuing, the athlete's recovery back to their sport. And I appreciate you saying that, because I feel like I do, for me personally, I need to have a healthier perspective of for each individual, it is a big deal, regardless of if they're trying, to be able to stay in their home that they lived in for 50 years, or if it's that 14-year-old girl that wants to get back, on the volleyball court after she had an ACL injury, that they're a big deal. Those recovery processes are huge for those people individually. And yeah, just thank you for that, because I discredit that a lot, especially since I've kind of swung to the other end of home health and,
and
probably had a more negative view on my outpatient orthopedic.
Oh, and I was certainly guilty of that going through when I was at Spaulding and Shriners had kind of the holier than thou. Well, I worked with burned children from Nicaragua, and you're working with someone with an ankle sprain. Come on. Yeah. But, at the end of the day, we're all working with people who are having a difficult time, and it all means something to them. And while the care and the methods that we might use in acute care might be different than, say, outpatient orthopedics or in a SNF or anywhere, the goals are ultimately the same, and they're those of the person you're working with.
Yeah. So in that outpatient realm, for you, just reflecting back on that, what were some of the biggest frustrations in that job? And you can be as general or specific as you want.
Yeah, I think the biggest difficulty was, coming from being in mostly hospitals throughout school, where you're largely working with one patient at a time. I think going to the outpatient orthopedic experience that a lot of new grads have, where there's intense pressures of productivity, which is not necessarily the fault of the clinic or the manager or anything like that, but more so nature of the healthcare environment we're in. That kind of made it difficult, for me at least. I know some people thrive in that kind of environment of seeing 2, 3, 4 patients an hour. And I'm not going to say that one-to-one care is necessarily better all the time. I'm sure there's some sections and populations that do really well with that kind of group care. But for me personally, as a clinician, I didn't feel like I could deliver the care that I would want to give to my mom, to say. So I felt like I wasn't necessarily thriving in that environment, and proud of some of the treatments and plan of cares that I was able to deliver in that kind of environment.
Yeah, I'll echo that too, man. Just I'm a slow individual, and I had a pretty slow pace clinic, but man, if I had 2 or 3 patients, which I know some therapists listen to the show, they'll be laughing because, they handle 4 with no problem an hour. And I would get 2 to 3 and I would just be so overwhelmed. I couldn't think clearly. And I would just default to just some random exercise or intervention just to buy me some time to get to the next hour or the next patient. And at the end of the day, I was absolutely wiped and absolutely, discontent with the care that I provided.
Yeah, I think everybody's been there where you're just doing something to keep your head above water.
Yeah, I drink a lot of beer when I went to outpatient.
a lot of late nights with beer over documentation.
Yeah. So after that, you mentioned you moved out to the beautiful state of Utah in Salt Lake, and you did home health. Talk us through that transition in terms of, were you looking at different settings, or were you deliberately wanting to work in home health? Kind of what was your internal dialogue when you made that transition?
I guess it's kind of similar as to how I got into physical therapy, just a wing and a prayer there, which is, I guess, a habit of mine. I applied to a lot of different settings out in Utah, mostly with the University of Utah and the Intermountain Healthcare Systems out there. Those were 2 kind of institutions that I wanted to be a part of. So I had applied to an outpatient interdisciplinary pain clinic, a few hospitals in the area, Children's Hospital, your general kind of community hospital. And then home health was kind of something I just tossed out there as a casual interest, just spreading my net wide there. And I got to talking to a few people on social media about home care, because it's not something I had huge exposure to or interest in school. I think the biggest guy that got me into it was Keith P. I think his Twitter handle's 18mm at this time. He's a really smart, insightful guy who was kind enough to answer all my mundane questions about home health and talk to me about his experiences. And some of the things that he highlighted about home health really kind of struck a chord with me, particularly the idea of you're always working with one patient, and they haven't figured out a way to get you into 2 homes at once yet. So that's good.
Just wait.
And just the ability to develop a therapeutic alliance with someone in the home is, in his words, bar none, except for maybe being in the school system there. So those were kind of things that really struck a chord with me, and analogous to kind of what I really liked about being at Spaulding or Shriners, really getting to know the person and their family. And especially in home health, you really get to know the environment that they're in and day out, as opposed to a hospital bed and a hospital room and a gym down the hall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So has his words of wisdom proved true in your experience?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think he could have prepared me for some of the homes I've been in out here, which is always exciting. And he didn't mention how many times you get nipped at by little dogs. But,
you carry treats on you, man?
I don't carry treats on me.
Yeah, just carry some treats. You'll be fine.
But yeah, I think he really nailed it on the head. And I think I've about a year and a half now been in home health. I've really seen that and experienced that, which has been so rewarding. You're not with the patients for as long as, say, in an inpatient rehab hospital or a setting like Shriners, which is a good and a bad thing. It means they don't need you too long. There are a few of those people who seem to show up on your caseload every few months for something new, which is unfortunate, but
yeah,
it's been a great experience.
Yeah. Were you concerned about all those amazing orthopedic, I'm sure, manual skills that you gained in Boston? Or were you worried about losing those when you went to home health?
Not particularly. It's, there's that big debate over manual therapy and its meaningfulness and specificity and things like that. It's not something I was worried about squandering, really. I don't say that I use manual therapy very often at all in practice. I think my goals are more so from kind of the things that you talk about a lot and have a big interest in, just getting old people strong again. And
yeah, it's quite the task, but man, it's effective.
Yeah.
I'll say that. So I think that's a good transition into your blog. So Physiological PT. Why that title?
So that was started, I think, 2 years ago now, with a former clinical instructor and now close friend, Chris Joyce. He's a physical therapist still out in the Boston area. He's now getting his PhD over at the Mass General Hospital Institute of Health Professions. He contributed a whopping 1 blog post and then got too busy with real world stuff to churn out some posts there. But I still consider him the co-founder and my partner in crime there.
Nice.
We were just kind of jamming about titles and things like that, and Physiological just sounded like something that was catchy and kind of embodied what we were interested in writing about. There's a lot of physical therapy blogs out there that give details about, clinical pearls for certain conditions and that kind of stuff, which is so valuable. And I definitely love reading those, but we wanted to write more about the underlying kind of critical thinking, science, evidence-based practice, literacy, and those kind of things. So that's kind of how the physiological thing came out, and just thought it was a clever way to title it.
Yeah. And it worked on me for sure. Cause when I came across you and saw that, I was like, who is this guy? And started, just to devour a lot of your posts. And it hit me at the right time because like I said, I was kind of a sports guy, and, right out of school, I did a McKinsey course, and then I did SFMA and FMS and, all these kind of, these systems and based on a lot of, there's a lot of gurus in that world. We'll just say that. And I drank the Kool-Aid. I was all about all these different courses that I took, and I didn't even question their validity or are they being properly applied? Are they true? And I just kind of went with it because, people I respected were using these systems to, help treat their patients. And then I met some, people like you and Kyle Ridgway. I've interacted with Keith a little bit online, and just different people that get me thinking and questioning and just wondering what if. And that has helped me. I feel like I have the ability to sift through some of the, I guess, the BS in our field, and just to see like what is valid and what is something that we can stand hard on in terms of a treatment approach or evaluation or whatnot. So I want to thank you for that, because you are challenging a lot of thoughts, or a lot of I guess a lot of issues that we have in this profession. You're bringing kind of a fresh light to it, in my perspective, at least.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And for me, I'm mostly just trying to steal other people's ideas and repackage them in a PT consumable light there. So yeah. I've definitely been influenced by a lot of people who have been doing this stuff longer than I have, especially in the PT realm. People like Neil O'Connell, Jason Silvernail, Kyle Ridgway, who you mentioned, Eric Mira, and JW Matheson. They're doing some great stuff with their podcast and things like that. Yeah. And then more importantly, people outside of physical therapy. So a lot of those, skeptics out there in medicine and philosophy and that kind of thing, talking about cognitive biases, decision-making, and psychological things like that have been hugely important in developing my thinking and my writing. Yeah.
It's, and once you become aware of that, especially, if some of these cognitive biases are brought to light, it's really hard to look at things very differently. And I'm very hesitant to trust myself or my feelings. So I'm just questioning everything right now, which, is definitely a blessing and a curse some days, because I do just want to just kind of go with the masses in some things and not critically think, because that's kind of easy at some point. But I'm just really thankful for people like you, just, calling stuff out and just raising a lot of questions. But I'm interested just for you, you've been out for, a couple of years, you're on Twitter, you see what's going around, the social media sphere in terms of physical therapy. If you were to talk to new grads, what would you say to them in terms of what should they guard against, or what should they be concerned about, I guess? Because it seems like, you come out of school, you could go in so many different directions, Absolutely. In terms of what information you consume, and especially if you're not able to decipher what is worth continuing to pursue or not. It can get you into trouble. So what would you say to the new grad coming out?
Well, I think it's important as a student, a new grad, and even down the road as a very experienced clinician, to constantly be questioning everything. I think just living with crippling self-doubt is important, to sound a little melancholy there. Yeah. So never take anything at its face value. So if someone's making a claim in a university lecture or a continuing education course or a book, a tweet, a blog, always to be open to asking that person how they came to that conclusion, or what kind of underlies that claim there, and assessing what's supporting that and what's building upon that person's kind of decision there to say strengthening doesn't work in old people, that kind of thing. Just being able to not be afraid to ask those questions, not being afraid to critically appraise things like literature, clinical practice guidelines, and kind of the things that we've always done and taken for granted as, well, it's always been done this way. Not being afraid to challenge those things, whether you're a student or a new grad like myself, or someone who's a little further down the line in clinical practice or academia.
Mm. When you got out of school, were you much of a skeptic? Did you have critical thinking down pat right when you got out of school, or do you feel like that's kind of a skill that is exercised and grown throughout the years?
Oh, I definitely don't think I have it down pat. I probably make more mistakes than most people each day. I think how I got started with being skeptical, and I'll thank my mom for this, was with things like the tooth fairy and that kind of thing. So yeah. I conducted my own little experiment when I was young with the tooth fairy. I lost a tooth, and didn't tell my mom and just put the tooth under my pillow. Woke up the next morning and the tooth was there, and felt like that was enough evidence to tear down the Easter Bunny and Santa. So very generalizable.
So were you the kid that was running around the playground just screaming, "There is no such thing as Santa Claus," ruining everyone's Christmas?
Yeah, I had a lot of friends. You could say that.
That's funny.
But no, I think I was just fortunate to be around some folks in school, classmates, teachers, and then clinical instructors like Chris Joyce, who I started Physiological with, were hugely influential on my thinking there. And I think a big thing that I'm really fortunate is to have gotten started on social media early on, because we're so lucky to be in a time where you can connect with clinicians and academics and people from different fields all over the world. And I think getting exposed to some of the stuff that was out there when I was going through school between 2008 and 2014 was just hugely influential to me, because it made me think, well, hey, this is almost completely contradictory to some of the things that I'm learning in school. What's really going on here? So that curiosity, I think, just led me down a big rabbit hole of blog posts and tweets and journal articles that eventually brought my interest less so to the nuts and bolts of clinical practice, like whether X intervention works well, or this particular kind of clinical process, whether it be Maitland-McKenzie, but more so the thinking and the understanding that underlies all of that. So scientific literacy, critical thinking, interpreting and appraising literature like that.
Yeah, that is huge. When did you get on social media? What year was that?
I think I got started on Twitter, let's see, probably around 2010, 2011. It was sometime when I was on my second co-op at Shriners Hospital. We were fortunate that there wasn't a lot of kids being burned, thankfully. So I had some slow days there, and I just kind of would go online and search out physical therapy things, and found a couple blogs like Urson Religioso's blog, Mike Reynolds were two that I kind of really started with when Forward Thinking PT with Joseph Brents first started a while ago. And then I saw that those guys were on Twitter, and kind of was lurking on Twitter for a while. And I think I started becoming active on Twitter right around CSM, the first one I went to, which was in San Diego. I think that was, 4 or 5 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So one thing, I know you have written about, in your blog, has been kind of the role of evidence-based practice. And I mean, it's, gosh, that term in PT school, just beaten to our skulls. But I'd like to hear just your opinion on that. What do you think? How should a regular physical therapist like me view evidence-based practice that's working with patients day in, day out?
Yeah, so I think they're, and this is just my bias from what I see on social media and with coworkers and things like that. I think there's a big misunderstanding as to what evidence-based practice is, what its role in healthcare is, and how it can help us as clinicians. One of the things I see the most is people portraying evidence-based practice as this mindless, robotic, like decision-making, rule-driven thing that removes all thinking and autonomy from the clinician, or removes the individualness of each patient. I think it's our role as clinicians to use our education and our expertise to take these big trials that aren't necessarily representative of the person in front of us, but apply it in the best way we reasonably can with our current understanding of physiology, anatomy, and the more empiric stuff from randomized controlled trials, systematic reviews, or case studies, that kind of thing.
Do you feel like evidence-based practice is a proper name Do you feel like, because I've heard evidence-informed practice and, arguments for that, kind of what's your take on the terminology there?
I think it does a nice job as defined by David Sackett and as discussed by other people like Jeremy Howick in his book, Philosophy on Evidence-Based Medicine. I think evidence-informed practice is kind of just, I guess, meaningless to me. It's not a meaningful change. I've asked people who use the term, what's the difference between evidence-informed practice and evidence-based practice? And I'd say more often than not, what they describe as evidence-informed practice is actually what evidence-based practice truly is. I think it's just a kind of a rhetoric to seem that you're less kind of mindlessly driven by evidence and more informed, with air quotes around that.
I could tell.
So I think it's important to be conscious of those things. And I think those people that are calling for more evidence-informed practice aren't necessarily wrong or misguided. I think they're making a valid point that we need to be very discriminatory in how we apply evidence from these big trials of 300 people to the person in front of us. And I think the folks over with Cause Health, like Roger Carey, and those guys and girls are doing a nice job of that. I think their message sometimes gets misinterpreted on social media with the N of one slogan. And they're the first people to admit that. But I think when you really dive into what they're doing and read some of their work, it's really good stuff that's challenging a lot of my biases. So I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah. Cause Health. I think Neil Maltby spoke there.
Yeah, he does a fantastic job with his blog over there.
Man, that guy. He knows this, but I have a man crush on him. That freaking accent, man. Yeah. It's the more I spend, the more time I spend on social media and the more time I spend with patients. I hope I'm getting better, but it's like, man, this, I wouldn't say tension, but just like balancing, this N of one, this person and all the factors that go into that, all the things you have to consider. But then also on the other hand, that peer reviewed, research study that, says, this will more than likely work with this type of person. Just kind of bringing those together, is a challenge. I feel like I'm getting better at it, but I definitely feel like it has come with lots of mistakes over the past 5 years, which I guess is to be expected. I just want to figure this PT stuff out, man.
Yeah, I don't think anyone has yet. We're all just working to be a little less wrong.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I want to talk about CSM because I saw you were on a panel this year, February, was it 17th, around there, San Antonio, Texas. What are you on a panel about? What are you going to be discussing?
So we're going to be talking about dry needling. I don't remember when it was. I think it was summer of 2015. Kyle Ridgway and I responded to an article in PT in Motion discussing the evidence for needling, I think, in knee osteoarthritis. And it spawned this whole social media kind of bit of blogs and retorts and that kind of thing. And one of the things that we got hurled at us a lot was, why is a home health PT and an acute care physical therapist writing about dry needling, something that isn't really in our areas, so to speak. And from Kyle and I's perspective, we're less interested in dry needling per se, but more so what leads people to believe or think that dry needling is a meaningful intervention, or how they decided that it works. What's their decision making behind that? What's their understanding of the literature that's out there? And what we were seeing was a major discrepancy in the claims that are made about dry needling and acupuncture that doesn't necessarily match up with what our best available evidence suggests. So we wanted to use that kind of as a teaching tool to emphasize the need for improved understanding of research, evidence-based practice, and how they can best inform us providing quality care to patients, which is something that's universal to all settings. So Sandy Hilton reached out to me and Kyle to get up an Oxford-style debate. So we grabbed two other clinicians, Scott Epsley and Blair Green, who unfortunately, due to changing jobs and scheduling conflicts, have had to drop out. So we're in the process of grabbing some new folks there. I think Sandy just grabbed someone, and then we're looking for a fourth. So if you're interested in coming on and being on the pro side of dry needling, we're welcome to have you.
I dare someone to take that. No, I'm kidding. I'm really excited to sit in on that discussion if I can save a seat, because I know it's going to be packed. But yeah, like you just mentioned, I'm not necessarily concerned about dry needling, but just the thought process of and just how you critically analyze something to see if it is valid. That's what I'm excited to walk away from in that discussion. Whether they say the consensus is dry needling is effective or is not effective. Just how I'm excited to hear you and Kyle kind of present how we need to think about this, because it's just very refreshing for me to hear you all speak to that, especially with what all goes around the interwebs on the Facebooks and Twitter sphere. For sure. So, I'm sure it's going to be, I hope it remains a very respectful discussion, which I'm sure it will. We're at CSM. We're all professionals.
We're very excited. We got Scott Morrison moderating, and he's a pretty big, strong guy. So I think he's going to keep us all in check there. And that's why we brought him in as the muscle to keep everyone in line.
That's awesome. All right. Well, I'm excited about that. So for people, just consider going to CSM. I mean, they got quite the lineup this year. A lot of people that you hear on this podcast, like Jason Falvey, Kyle Ridgway, Karen Litzy, Kenny right here, they're going to be talking and presenting, just their perspective on different topics. And just even beyond the topics and all the discussions, I mean, just the value of getting to interact with other people and build those relationships and connect with them. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. And for me, last year was my first year, and it blew my mind away of just how beneficial that it could be to actually gather with people that all do the same thing as I do.
Yeah, it's a remarkable and wonderful experience. I think last year was the first year I missed since I started going around the San Diego time. So too bad that I missed you. But just to be in the same place as so many motivated and driven, like-minded clinicians is fantastic and so refreshing. And you always really leave feeling energized for the profession and the direction it's going in. And there's always I think the best part of CSM is actually outside of the sessions, when you're just sitting down with someone and having a beer and hashing things out. And so you really get some good discussions there.
Yeah. And I know Kyle Ridgway is usually always down for that. And he's historically, been at the hotel bar till 2 or 3 in the morning, still talking about physical therapy.
Yeah. He definitely outlasted me by days when we were in Las Vegas and Indianapolis. So
that's funny. All right, well, let's shift gears. Let's just wrap things up just with some quick questions.
Sure.
Let's start off with, what would you tell your, let's go 22-year-old self, if you were to give them some professional advice or wisdom? What would you tell the 22-year-old Kenny?
I think to dial it back a little bit. I think in my earlier writing and things like that, I might have been over aggressive in claims and tone and thing like that. So you're definitely not going to change anyone's mind if they feel like they're being attacked, or you're being, I guess, aggressive and abrasive, which is something that I try to be very conscious of now in my writing, whether it's just about something boring like a cognitive bias, or something a little more sexy and juicy like dry needling. Mm-hmm. So always trying to be respectful, even-keeled, level-headed. I think you've got a much better chance of not necessarily changing the person, say you're debating with his mind, but those people that are on the sidelines, following along on social media or in the audience at CSM who might be on the fence. I think they're going to be a little more open to the person's perspective who is a little more level-headed than the guy who's screaming his head off and throwing things at the wall.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. Just as an observer to some of these conversations, I would definitely say
they can get a little salty online, which is always fun to watch.
Yeah. So in your current job, home health, if you think of some of your favorite apps or pieces of technology or even pieces of equipment, what has been some of the most helpful, tools that you've used with your patients?
I think,
or just with the job in general. Sorry.
Yeah, I think just anything heavy, showing that these patients are strong and very capable of things that they don't necessarily think they are. When you go into someone's home who they spend most of their time in their recliner and they haven't gone for a walk outside in maybe a year, and you talk to them about doing a squat while holding a kettlebell or doing some farmer walks with whatever they might have lying around. Yeah. They kind of look at you with a crazy eye and try to kick you out of their house. But just showing them how capable they are and reducing that threat of just movement and challenging themselves and getting stronger has been so important to me. I don't use a lot of technology, to be honest. I use a stopwatch for things like the timed up and go and the 5 times sit to stand and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But most of it's just good old manual labor with heavy things.
Man, I like it. Yeah, the apps I've started to kind of delve into that, just because there's a lot more therapy focused apps that are coming out that have, a lot of those objective measures that we'll, commonly use in the home health setting that have made it, a little easier. But yeah, I've got my old Timex Ironman that's been my old faithful.
Yeah, I think there are a couple apps out there for things like gait speed, which is really nice, and SPPB and that kind of thing, just to simplify all that kind of stuff. I did a post a while back for Strive Labs and those guys, less so for the clinical side of things, but leveraging technology in your day-to-day to stay, up to date with practice in terms of putting journal searches and journal feeds into something like Feedly, using Pocket to save articles to read later and never actually read them. And then,
I was about to say,
that's just more of a graveyard for things I'll never read. But it's nice to think about. So that's something good. Just finding ways to leverage technology to make your practice better when you're not actually practicing. There's a lot of stuff out there for that.
Yeah, I appreciate your honesty. I use Pocket. Man, when I got out of school, I was reading everything. Yeah. I would clear it out at least every evening or every other evening. And that has not been the case the past few years. But nope. I'll put a link to that blog post for sure.
Yeah, I'll dig that up for you.
Okay. What about continuing education? What's been some of the most helpful continuing ed? And let's kind of narrow down to just working, with your geriatric clients. What's been helpful?
So I think there's always great stuff at CSM. Those are always some very great and helpful lectures. You can go pretty much anywhere, and it doesn't necessarily have to be within the home health setting or the geriatrics. And you can go to an orthopedic and sports section lecture and find a lot of really good stuff that's applicable to the patients you see every day. MedBridge is also great, and they have a lot of nice content there. Mm-hmm. I really want to make it out to Sandy Hilton and Sarah Hagg's clinic, but unfortunately scheduling hasn't worked out for some of the courses I've been really interested in. But we're fortunate that there's a lot of opportunities both online and locally now. And what's been most important for me is just trying to get into a schedule of self-learning. So being diligent about trying to read X amount of articles, or with driving around all day in home health, I do a lot of audiobooks, which isn't directly applicable to PT, but again, more so to those underlying things that we talked about, a lot of critical thinking, psychology, philosophy, that kind of stuff. So trying to maximize your time in that sense has been good for continuing ed. That doesn't necessarily get me credits to keep my license, unfortunately.
Yeah. Automobile University.
Absolutely.
All right. So last question. So let's say we're at CSM, San Antonio. You just get done with your panel presentation, or debate, as you will. But let's say there's a bunch of geriatric rehab clinicians and you have their attention for like 30 seconds to a minute. If you had that chance, what would you want them to know?
I would want them to know that the patients you're working with aren't frail. They're not weak. They have remarkable capabilities and potential, and that having them do, 3 sets of 10 straight leg raise, long arc quad, hip abduction, marching, and butt kicks just really isn't going to be a useful way of spending your time and their time. So not being afraid of really challenging your patients, because they are robust, they are capable, and they need it.
Preach it. Preach it, Kenny Venere. I like it. I'm excited for February. So if people want to connect with you or learn more about you, give us your the social media handles and your website URL, and I'll link to all this in the show notes.
So they can hurl any insults they want on Twitter at KVenere, K V as in Victor, ENERE. Blog, which is very infrequently updated, is PhysiologicalPT.com. And always open to chat. Don't be afraid to send a message, positive or not. And that's how we learn, is that kind of engagement and that constructive criticism.
All right. Links in the show notes. Kenny Venere, thank you for your time. I'll see you in February.
Hey, a pleasure. Looking forward to meeting you. Thanks for chatting.
All right.